Well, hello again, guys, from here inside St James's Park on a night that didn't quite go as we expected. Now, for those of you who subscribe to my Newcastle United dedicated WhatsApp channel, hands up in my pre-match voice note dispatch, I was talking of 3s, 4s and 5s. Little did I know, come the end of the night, those would actually end up being my Newcastle United player ratings, yet the merit stars. We'll get to those in just a moment. I have to admit it was more a process of elimination than it was picking those who I thought particularly shone for Newcastle tonight. For all of that, it wasn't the worst performance in the world in the first half. We'll get to the second half, which wasn't good at all. But certainly during the opening 45 minutes, Newcastle were, what you'd say, is the better team. They had more territory, more chances, more positions of promise. We'll get in a way. There's a lot to get to tonight, guys. We'll get to why they weren't able to convert on those in just a moment. But what I want to start with is what Eddie Howe has just said to us downstairs, and that is that goals change games. And while you might be shouting back, isn't that the most obvious statement? Goals change every game. I think in the case of tonight, it is particularly true and particularly apt because, as I've already mentioned, Newcastle started well for the first 10 minutes. The chance to make it 4 wins on the spin in all competitions was that wonderful display in the stands before. It had all the makings of a good night for Newcastle. They started on the front foot. They had one or two little openings. Alexander Isak lashed one wide after a few minutes, and you thought this is going to go perhaps as we expected. Could it be 3s, 4s and 5s even? But then they conceded a goal, and that's where we've got to start with the two concessions, because Eddie Howe was right when he said that those changed the game, particularly that goal in the 10th minute. And you could all see how it was going to play out. It was quite bizarre, really, from our vantage up in the press box. Emerson takes the corner, and it's as if everything stops and it plays out in slow motion, really. Lloyd Kelly, for reasons known only to himself, decides to step away from Thomas Soucek. Soucek plants his feet in the floor and he plants his head at the bottom corner. To give you an idea of how easy it was, Soucek, who's 6'4", was actually able to stoop and duck and divert his head at the bottom corner. Kelly was nowhere near him. Goodness knows why he decided to move away from the point of danger. Only he knows. It was just a really, really bad goal to concede, and it seemed to knock Newcastle. There was a 5 or 10 minute spell after that where they really were rattled, and Eddie, just in the dugout there in front of us, you know, he was screaming at his players to liven up and to get back on it, and he was reminding them that during that first 5 or 10 minutes before the goal, they'd played okay, they'd done well, and they did manage to recover. They had to ride the luck a little bit, because you sat there in the press box thinking, West Ham are going to go and get a second here. Newcastle became sloppy. Shea gave the ball away once or twice, but they did recover from that. And you've got to see, we've got to talk through the game while that second half, and Eddie's words has left a really negative feeling, and I see there's a lot of anger and negativity online towards the performance. Let's be honest and say that in the first half, Newcastle did okay. They worked themselves into positions of promise, but, and this is the big but, and this is something we've spoken about a lot, and I don't know why this happens, because Newcastle have got players to be better than what they are in terms of that final ball, that final execution, and that decision making. That is what let them down so badly. My 8-year-old son, after about half an hour, used my wife's phone to send me a text message with a load of furious emojis complaining about Newcastle's crossing. Well, it wasn't just the crossing, it was the final shot, the final pass. But ultimately, I'll go back, and my 8-year-old was right, perhaps not for the first time when it comes to discussing football with myself. The crossing was atrocious, really, and it shouldn't be. And that's the point I made to Eddie afterwards. I asked this question. We're sat here now talking about a game playing out in the way that others have done previously. Brighton at home especially, a lot of those hallmarks, a lot of those same phrases we're using them with copy: final ball, final execution, decision, shot, pass, through ball, whatever it may be. Why isn't it as good as it should be, given you've got Alexander Isak, Anthony Gordon, the full England international, Bruno Guimaraes and others as well? Now, Eddie was almost at a loss to explain, give me an answer. He said, well, that's a big question, But when the onus is on Newcastle to pick the lock, they don't really seem to have any ideas. They look far more comfortable and happier when they're running away freely upfield with the key, when they're able to play on the break and on the transition. And that is becoming a little bit of a problem now, because as much as you came into this game full of confidence that Newcastle would pick up where they left off before the break and they'd hit upon the winning formula, there was always that suspicion and that fear to a degree that the game could play out perhaps in the way that it does when a team does sit in. Do Newcastle have the answers there? And again, tonight they haven't done, and the tone was set really early on. Anthony Gordon got away down the left, but it was a poor left foot delivery. It was easily cleared. Joe Willock had another one that was blocked, and just all night, no matter which flank it came from or through the middle, that that final, I use that word all the time, that final execution was poor and it was lacking, and it really cost Newcastle to the point that going into the second half, and again, to come back to what Eddie said, goals change games, and we've got to pick through this second goal, because at half time, Harvey Barnes comes on, and even then, we're sat there in the press room. You say Newcastle aren't out of this. If Newcastle come back and win 2-1, given they were playing, I use that phrase, they were playing okay, they were playing well enough, it wasn't disaster stations by any stretch of the imagination. And you thought if they got that one goal, it could perhaps become 2 and become 3, and they had the options off the bench, all of that to come, the cavalry if you like. And I must admit, at half time, I didn't think Newcastle were a beaten team. I probably still imagined they would come back and win it, but within 10-15 minutes of the second half, that all changed, and in part because of the goal as well. And it's Lloyd Kelly again who really doesn't cover himself in glory at all. Now it's a poor headed clearance, the ball falls to Bruno Guimaraes there on half time. Guimaraes isn't aware of the danger behind him, he loses it to Lucas Paqueta. The ball is then worked right to Jared Bowen. Now watch a replay of this back, because Aaron Wan-Bissaka hasn't scored a goal for West Ham yet. In fact, he hasn't scored a goal for any team in the best part of 3 years. Now, you would have thought with Harvey Barnes coming in at half-time, Bissaka would have been more concerned with just operating in the, Bissaka when he defends, Bissaka when he goes forward. So Aaron Wan-Bissaka, he breaks free from the right-back position there, senses a weakness in Newcastle's resistance. It was bizarre, really, given how well they've defended of late. And I've watched the replay back to come back to the point I was about to make there. Joelinton, for whatever reason, I thought Joelinton had an okay game, just decides not to follow Wan-Bissaka's run. Bissaka gets into the box, and Lloyd Kelly, rather than defend the space that might become a problem, and then when that space does become a problem and Wan-Bissaka populates it, rather than to go to the ball, he becomes statuesque and almost guides shows Bissaka the area into which he's got to aim and which he's got to score. And it's really, really poor. When Dan Burn comes out of the team, just underlined his importance, especially this season. I think he's been magnificent. And that defensively there, 2 points of real weakness, both centering on Lloyd Kelly, has ultimately been Newcastle's undoing there tonight. So Newcastle are now 2-0 down after 54 minutes, but even then, they haven't really played terribly, but what followed from that point on was so disjointed, so ragged. Echoes of that Brighton performance where the substitutes come on and the substitutes make Newcastle worse. Now, this was something that was asked of Eddie downstairs and he agreed with, and he actually made a really pointed comment that in terms of those players coming on and influence selection for the next game, players who probably want to start, Harvey Barnes, Sandro Tonali, I know Wilson and Trippier have come back from injury, but very soon they're going to be knocking on the door. Jacob Murphy, another one who started the season in the team, he's come on again there. Not one of those substitutions. Listen, Trippier came on very late, a free pass for him, but certainly the other four haven't done enough to earn a place in the side. Now, in terms of the changes and were they the right changes, well, yes, I wouldn't really disagree with any of them. Sandro Tonali coming on for Sean Longstaff at the point he did. You looked at it and thought Newcastle need a little bit more guile in there. That was the obvious change to make. But Tonali came on and wasn't very good at all. In fact, I think Howe's comments were probably directed most at Barnes and Tonali. Barnes, who has become something of a super sub this season, a title he doesn't like and one Eddie Howe denies, but nonetheless when he comes on at half-time, that was forced by a little knock to the leg for Joe Willock. It was an enforced change, but even still, you're thinking, yes, Harvey Barnes is probably just the type of player Newcastle need. He was a little bit wishy-washy, didn't do enough to really trouble Wan-Bissaka, didn't really see him get into that position of his trademark move where he does drive towards the opposition, cut in and make things happen. That was poor. Tonali came on and didn't get on the ball enough. When he did, he was sloppy with it, a lot of huff and a lot of puff. So you'd expect to see Tonali stay on the bench if Bruno isn't injured. Of course, Bruno went off with a glute problem. Yeah, insert your own jokes here. So whether he is fit enough for the weekend or not, we'll have to wait and see. But even still, I don't think Tonali, having come out of the team, is certainly doing enough on the evidence of that half an hour there to say, put me back in the side. And Newcastle just became so, I use that word because it's the only one really to come back to, ragged. They lost all identity, all semblance of a game plan. They went to a 4-4-2. Callum Wilson came on. That didn't really work. But again, now, I wouldn't blame the manager for that. The slight change in formation, perhaps, but when you're chasing 2 goals, you put 2 strikers on. That's what you're going to have to do, really. I would focus it more on the players who came on and on those who started the game. I would put this one back on the players. One user on X came back at me and said, this one's on Eddie, got it wrong from the start. Really? I'm not having that. I honestly wouldn't have picked a team any different from the one that started today. Lloyd Kelly's last start in terms of coming into Darnburn was against Chelsea here, when a lot of you guys said Lloyd Kelly is actually the better bet as that left-sided centre-half. So you wouldn't have changed the side that won so well down at Forest. Then when you looked at the bench, that strength, you picked the team sheet up before the game. And I, like many of you, were convinced that it was going to be a home win. I didn't look at it at all and say I would have done this differently or that differently. I would have started Joelinton on the left and Anthony Gordon on the right. A lot of people are saying Joelinton starting on the right was a mistake. Well, come on, you can't have a 45 minutes like you did down at Forest and win all of that praise and all of us guys come out of it and say Joelinton's still the solution, might just be him on the right and then not play him there in the next game. So I'm not having that. It's more to do with the execution and the application of those on the pitch. And to come back to one player, a player who I love and have given so much coverage and exposure to in the last 18 months, you know, to the point whereby my colleagues on the England beat take the mick about how much I push his cause and champion Anthony Gordon, but his form has become a little bit of a worry now, and it was evident there. I've already touched on this already. There was a cross inside the first 5 minutes where it's a really bad flat delivery when he's worked himself into a good position. And listen, he didn't hide in that first half. He saw plenty of the ball down the left, and again, he was part of a performance that when Newcastle were okay, they were good enough to score goals, to work themselves into those positions. But then he was switched to the right just before half-time, 5 or 10 minutes before half-time. He was involved in a dialogue with the bench, and his whole body language changed. And I thought he was poor in the second half, and when he came off, he deserved to come off. He deserved to be replaced, and that would be a concern because there's been all the talk and all the narrative around him coming out of the summer with his head turned, and there have been so many unsettling factors. And just when it seems he's getting back to somewhere to his very best, he then goes away on international duty, funny enough, and he comes back out of sorts and out of shape. And I know it's hard for those international players when they've travelled distances, and perhaps some of them played as much football as they want, or sometimes they've played too much, or whatever it may be. But Newcastle's international players there, Isak, Gordon and Guimaraes, 3 hours so key and so instrumental to what they do. They didn't really have a good night there. The best chance of all falls to Anthony Gordon when Jean-Claire Todibo makes that mistake. Newcastle's best chance was created by a West Ham player. That tells you sort of where Newcastle were at tonight in terms of that creation. And Gordon, should he do better? Is it a good save? I don't really know, but that was absolutely massive, that one way he's put it at Fabianski. And it was, on the whole, another poor night for him. Alexander Isak has had 2 decent enough chances where he's put both of them wide. Joe Willock has put one wide, Lewis Hall 2, and Fabianski in the air. The only save he's actually had to make was that one from Anthony Gordon. There was another effort on target, but it was a fairly weak Sean Longstaff header, which was catch and practice, and he's plucked it out of the sky. So that comes back to the point that we've been making for a long time now, that are Newcastle actually better when they don't have the ball? When they do have the ball, and the onus is on them to be that team who unlocks and probes and is ruthless when they do get chances. They just can't seem to do it. But this is the mystery to me, because they can be ruthless when they play on the break, and it's still the same fundamental thing you're trying to execute. You know, a shot on goal, putting in the back of the net. But for some reason, in this type of scenario, they really are struggling to do it now, and it's becoming a real problem for Eddie and his team. In terms of a solution, well, I don't think it's time to be talking of ripping it up and changing shape or personnel drastically. I just think to come back to the point I made at the start, and the one Eddie made with us, if Newcastle score the first goal or convert one of those early moments into a goal and into a lead, then it probably does become 2 or 3, and that then may grow in confidence. We saw here against Brighton and Everton away to a degree, when you don't get that goal, gradually that confidence drains and you become a little bit disjointed and a bit ragged. And to take you inside what I was doing tonight, you're working on a live game and you've got to work to deadline. I've got to file my report on 85 minutes, and after the second West Ham goal, at no point was I concerned or worried, thinking that the tone of it was going to have to change into a Newcastle victory or even a Newcastle draw, really. They didn't threaten at all. There was the penalty shout on Wilson. I actually think, I've seen one replay back, I do think it was a penalty, and maybe then that might have changed things. But even still, I think you've got to look at it beyond that and say that Newcastle just weren't good enough during that final half hour. And I wouldn't really put that on the manager. I thought of making this point again, but just to address it, because I know in light of a defeat, sometimes there's a lot of focus on the manager. I think he picked the right team and made the right changes, just those on the pitch didn't do enough for him by way of a response. Now, after all of that, I've got to come to the merit stars, and I'm not going to give a 3. I didn't think tonight was a night for anyone to be worthy of that. I'm going to go in ascending order. I'm going to give 2 players 1 star, and the 2 players I've almost kind of criticised during the course of this video, and they would be Joelinton and Alexander Isak. I'll start with Joelinton. I thought he was really poor for West Ham's second goal, not following Aaron Wan-Bissaka. But before that, I did think he put himself about. I thought he was fine. I thought he was the one who looked up for it, who was trying to influence the game. He tried to drive Newcastle forward. Listen, he wasn't great. It's a really lukewarm 1 star, I've got to say, but I did look at it and thought that he's decent enough form. I thought that he'd continued. I thought he was okay. You know, you might disagree, but okay is as far as I'm going to go. Now, Alexander Isak, he's missed those 2 chances, but I did think he was dangerous. I did think he was there. I thought he was putting himself into the right positions a couple of times. I think he would have had tap-ins if that ball from Gordon is better, or there was one from the right, I think, with Tino as well. You know, if that final pass, that final delivery is better. I did think Isak put himself about tonight and didn't really hide. Listen, like the rest of them, as the game went on, he got worse. They all didn't. During that final half hour, it almost became a complete non-event. But before that, I thought Isak was fine. Again, you know, that's as far as I'm going to go. And the 2 stars, well, they go to Lewis Hall. Now, I'm a little bit reluctant to give Hall the 2 stars, given that Jared Bowen was on his side and Bowen's had a hand in the second goal there, and he's probably been one of West Ham's most dangerous players. But I don't think he ever really got the better of Lewis Hall, and I thought Hall was sort of tidy enough and composed enough and confident in what he did. And he had one good run there where he drove forward and put it wide. So, yeah, it's a Hall 2 stars, but again, you know, these stars aren't really burning particularly bright on this occasion, sadly. Now, where do Newcastle go from here? Well, quite literally, it's down to Crystal Palace on Saturday, and I'll be there too. But if you look at this in the context of the season, it was something Eddie Howe touched on with us. It's just a massive opportunity missed, and this is what they've really got to work on now, because if they win tonight, they're up in 6th, and they're only 1 point off some of the really top teams there, and they've put themselves right back in the frame for what could be, it's looking like a pretty open race for that top 5 this season. But nights like tonight will set them back, like the Brighton game did, like Everton away did. They've got to find a way against the lesser teams, certainly here at home, where they're going to have more of the ball, to be better with it and to be a team who can play with the football. I'm sick of saying this now. Newcastle are better in matches where they don't necessarily have the ball, and that's becoming a real problem, especially when you look at the makeup of the squad as well. And we've spoken about that want to evolve into a better possession-based side who are in charge of their own destiny. Well, they probably still don't have the players for that. They've got 1 or 2 who might want to be that, the likes of Tonali, but you'd look at the moment and say he's perhaps better out of the side. Does Anthony Gordon, Joelinton, Isak want to play in a side that dominates possession? I don't think they necessarily do. So actually going down to Crystal Palace on Saturday, even though Palace aren't very good, and might, if the managers watch this tonight, just give the ball to Newcastle, let the onus be on them. That might be their best tactic. But I do think at the moment, there's an argument to be made, certainly as we saw down at Forest, that Newcastle might actually be better off away from home. And it's a shame, because we saw in the last 3, those 3 fabulous, brilliant victories, it looked like the season really was back on track. And it still is. Listen, it hasn't gone off the rails tonight. Again, there wasn't a disastrous performance apart from the second half. It was disastrous, if you know what I mean. So I would just stick with it, you know, and just hope that in games like this, they do get that early break. And to bring this video full circle, Eddie was right. Goals change games, and West Ham got them for them at the right time tonight and at the wrong time for Newcastle. But I'd also say, and I've made this point before, just because you do concede, it doesn't mean you have to become as disjointed as Newcastle became there in the second half. And that, again, is one of many issues coming out of tonight that Eddie has got to address. Well, that's it for now, guys. I've talked long enough for tonight. I'm pretty much the only one left in here. Although saying that, even on full time, there weren't too many others watching Newcastle doing the lap of appreciation there. And you understand that disappointment, really, because I think everyone ventured here, as I touched on at the very start there, with an expectation that it was going to be a good night. But that international break, sadly, it can happen. Eddie's just said to us there, for whatever reason, that's football. You go into those international break with your tails up, and all of a sudden you lose that contact time with the players. They go here, there and everywhere, and you come back and the form tables are totally reversed. I really didn't see this one coming tonight. But they've got a chance next week, another winnable one down at Crystal Palace, but they've got to find more consistency now and a way to be better in scenarios and situations like this, if it isn't going to be 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But let me know what you think below the line. What would you change? I've gone through this video and I've identified a problem, but I haven't really given a solution other than just sort of stick with it and hope that the likes of Isak and Gordon and others do take those chances when they do come along, because the chances and the opportunities and the openings and the positions are promised, to come back to that phrase, they are there. They are there. It's just that final execution. I've said it before. I'm sort of sick of saying that now. There's been a few games like that this season, and here tonight was yet another. But please comment below the line, hit like, subscribe. I'll put the link to my Blue Sky account as well. You know, plenty of debate over there too. One last scan of St James's. Yes, thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you again at the end of the week when I'll be seeing Eddie Howe up at the training ground before the trip down to Crystal Palace. Okay, take care. Good night. Bye-bye.